Hello, happy holidays, and welcome to the podcast. I am your host, Naomi, and this is Mosaic in Progress. I'm a few days late in releasing this episode, but we have been very busy here in expanding our outreach with the podcast. We are now available not only on Spotify, but on Apple Podcasts, on Amazon, Audible, and Google Podcasts. So wherever you listen to podcasts, we're pretty much there. The holidays bring a lot of stress for people as a general rule. The end of the year oftentimes is a really stressful time with work for a lot of people. It doesn't matter what industry you're in. Everything's kind of coming to a close and people are trying to finish things up. Even in healthcare, people are trying to have procedures done and things like that as their insurance money for the year is running out. They've met their deductible or they're trying to meet their deductible. To go ahead and get those things done before the year is out and things change over. And on top of that stress, there are a lot of people in certain industries who their work slows down at the end of the year, or they get furloughed and it's a slow time of the year, so there's not a lot of money coming in. And on top of that, the expectation of gifts, particularly in our society, we have this commercialized celebration of whatever holiday you celebrate religiously or spiritually or just secularly. There is an expectation of giving gifts and decorating and cooking more than you normally would cook and hosting, and all of these things require money. And for someone who is getting tighter at the end of the year and doesn't have the money to do it, that becomes an extra stress. And what's the point of talking about that? Because as you have added stress, it decreases your ability to deal with any more stress. And people often become short and ill-tempered, and their coping mechanisms kind of go out the window or become ineffective. And I think it's important to note the difference between overreaction to stress, and trauma-triggered overreaction to stress, and poor coping skills overreaction to stress, because they are different, though similar. And I kind of want to talk about that a little bit, because I think it's a thing that people have a huge problem with around this time of year, and not always just around this time of year, but it bears note now. So if you are a person who has dealt with a significant amount of trauma, especially if you are someone who has developed PTSD or CPTSD as a result of that trauma, your coping skills are going to be poor. That is not a character flaw. That is not a poor reflection on you as a person. That's not a judgment. That's just what trauma does to you. It decreases your ability to deal with any added stress. And if you add stress on top of someone who is already living in fight or flight mode, their reactions are generally going to be very poor. They're going to be explosive. They're going to be overly dramatic. They're not going to be consistent and in line with whatever stress is coming their way. Because it's not just that they accidentally spilled the milk, it's that they are hyper aware constantly because they don't feel safe. They're in fight or flight mode, and every single sensory input is registering in their brain because they need for it to make sure that they're safe, and they are dealing with the emotional weight of whatever trauma put them in that state, and then the milk spills. So it's not just that they spilled the milk, it's that they spilled the milk on top of everything else. And for someone who is dealing with unhealed trauma or re-triggered trauma, every small thing can become the straw that broke the camel's back. And so you consistently see these explosive or just what seems to be unreasonable reactions to very small things. And if you look at it deeper, you see that it is a very reasonable reaction because a person can only carry so much. And if you're carrying a huge load and someone adds one more thing, you will break down. And that is true physically, and it is true emotionally. And it's important to be kind to yourself and to be patient with yourself and to be understanding with yourself if you are a person who is dealing with trauma like that. And if you are a person who loves someone who is dealing with trauma like that, it's very important for you to be patient with them. It's very important for you to be understanding with them and to help them through it, to take initiative and offer them help. Ask them what they need. Ask them what you can do. Ask them how you can decrease their stress to help their load, whatever. Because, slight tangent, love is an active verb. Caring is an active verb, and it's not just a feeling that you have. If you are going to love someone who has trauma, you need to be willing and able to take initiative to help them. Because it's not their fault that they went through the trauma. The responsibility is their healing, but as a person loving them, you need to understand that part of loving them is not adding to the trauma and is helping them to heal. So what's the difference between that and overreaction? They're very similar reactions. And particularly in people who are neurodivergent in whatever way, whether it's autism or ADHD or bipolar or some other form of neurodivergence, the sensory interpretation of stimuli is so much different than what it is for a neurotypical person. You might not even register the sound that the fan or the heater is making, but for someone who is neurodivergent, it might be excessively loud. For example, I am a neurodivergent person, and one of our dogs is sitting about 3 feet in front of me, and I'm sure that the microphone is not picking up the sounds that she's making right now. She's nibbling away at an itchy spot and breathing heavily while she's doing it. And it sounds like she is at about the level of a rock concert to me right now. And I know my microphone is not picking it up. And I know if someone else who was normal was sitting in the room with me, they probably wouldn't even register it. But for me, it is excessive. And I can't ignore it. And I can't pretend it's not happening. And it is extremely distracting from anything else that I want to do. And I think it's important for people who are neurodivergent or people who love neurodivergent people to acknowledge that that is a huge problem that we deal with. That level of sensory interpretation is different. And things that might seem normal for other people are not for us. And so I was talking to a friend about clothing the other day. And I don't remember what particular type of clothing we were talking about, or particular article of clothing or material. But we were talking about things that are uncomfortable. And I said, I don't know why people wear uncomfortable clothes on purpose. I don't know how they can. If I wear something that is uncomfortable, about 2 or 3 hours into it, my day is ruined. Because it's all my brain can focus on. And no matter how much I try to ignore that it's happening, it's there like a scream in the back of my brain. And I have likened it to a headache. And I think even neurotypical people can understand this. If you have a really bad headache that you can't get rid of, it's there for your entire day. It's grating on you. It's causing you discomfort. It's causing you pain. It's distracting you and overloading your sensory inputs to the point that the entire rest of your day kind of revolves around the fact that you have a headache. Because you can't ignore it. It's there. It's literally in your brain. It's not something that's ignorable. And even if you try really hard to ignore it, you're in a bad mood. I don't know anyone who goes through the day with a headache who's not in a bad mood. And that's not a judgment. That's a normal thing. Headaches put you in a bad mood. That is what it's like being neurodivergent and overstimulated. It's like a headache. You can't ignore it. You can't pretend that it's not there. You can't just try to go on and deal with it later. It is always there. It is always bothering you. It is affecting everything you do for the rest of your day. And just like people with a headache often do, when you add something else, some other stress, it's too much. And that's why I say that overstimulated overreactions are very similar to a trauma-triggered overreaction. It's that carrying too much and you can't carry anymore scenario. And they come from different spaces, and neurodivergence often comes from a root of trauma, not always, but sometimes. And it's not a character flaw. It is something that needs to be dealt with. It's something that you need to learn how to cope with. But it's not anything that you can say, well, you're a bad person because you have trauma or you're neurodivergent, and that means you can only handle so much stimulation or so much stress. Of course you can't. Your brain doesn't allow you to handle more than it can carry, and its carrying capacity is limited because of either trauma or neurodivergence. That doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you. It doesn't mean you're flawed. It just means you have to learn a different way to cope and to live. Now, how does that correlate or compare with poor coping skills? Overreaction. Because there are people in the world, and for some of them, it is a root of trauma or neurodivergence. But there are people who choose to view everything through a negative lens. There are people who choose to always see the worst. And a negative mentality is not necessarily linked to trauma or neurodivergence, but a negative mentality will give you similar coping mechanisms and reactions if you have those things. I've known so many people in my life who, it doesn't matter what's going on in their life, everything is the worst. Everything is a catastrophe. And I see these people over and over again. They just draw in negativity. It's like they become a magnet for it. And they almost thrive on it in a way. With apologies, I got interrupted in the recording by my dog who wanted to whine at something outside that I don't see, but got a little derailed. Back to where we were. Overreacting because of poor coping mechanisms, and a negative mentality. So I have so many friends who, I won't say so many, I don't have as much anymore because I've distanced myself from that mentality, but I've known a lot of people in my life who just seem to call in negativity to themselves. And it's to the point that it becomes almost intentional. I don't necessarily think anyone really wants to call in negativity or to make their lives bad, but because of their mentality and because of their actions and because of their reactions, they call it in, they align themselves with it. And these are the people who you see who are just constantly getting sick or having their car break down or a washing machine or whatever. And it's not just, I got sick and my washing machine broke down and my car broke down and everything. It's a catastrophe for them every time something happens like that. It's not, this is just life. Their life is a constant series of catastrophes. And it's painful to watch people's lives who are like this because it's literally just one right after another. You know, well, and now I'm sick on Christmas. And oh, I failed out of school. And oh, of course the washing machine broke down now. And it's not just that there are freezing temperatures everywhere and the water went out, which is a normal thing that happens around that time. Utilities and infrastructure suffers when there are extremes. And rather than just taking it in stride, and no one wants to deal with that. I don't mean to say that it's not an inconvenience or a bad thing, but rather than just, okay, this is the thing that happened, we're going to deal with it and get through it, it suddenly becomes the worst thing that could have happened, and they jump on social media and they want to rant about it. And I can't believe this would happen on Christmas, and I can't believe this would happen now. And of course it's great with freezing temperatures, my power going out or my water going out. And you're like looking at these reactions going, is this reasonable? And it's so much more than just, okay, I'm overstimulated, or okay, this is too much for me to deal with, or I'm triggered. It's this constant cycle of negativity and a negative mentality that every bad thing that happens for them is catastrophic. And they blow it out of proportion into something even more catastrophic. And harp on it and marinate in it and over dramatize it and sit in it to the point that they start calling in even more bad things because they're so focused on the negative and they give so much attention and energy to the negative that that's what keeps coming to them. You cannot call in good while focusing on the bad. You can't change your life for better or into good by focusing on the things that are bad. You can't heal if you keep picking at a wound. And it's very hard to not either be disgusted with or pity people who have chosen to be stuck in a negative mentality. Because it is a choice. No matter what happens to you, no matter what you've been through, no matter what your brain chemistry or anatomy is structured or functioning like, you have a choice with the mentality that you carry. You can choose to focus on the good or you can choose to focus on the bad. You can choose to focus on healing or you can choose to focus on the pain. You can choose to be limited or you can choose to thrive. I was very lucky with my first therapist that I had who diagnosed me with bipolar disorder in that she told me that I was lucky to have bipolar disorder. She told me because I had it, I was at an advantage. My brain worked like no one else's could. Well, not no one in the entire world, but my brain didn't work like normal people's did, and that was an advantage to me. She told me that because I could be so analytical and logical, and because I could also be very creative and artistic and think outside the box, that I could do anything, that I could follow any dream, that I could create anything that I wanted to, because my brain didn't work like normal people's. It was my asset. And I realize that not everyone gets that level of encouragement and motivation and support. But I also chose to believe her, and I've known plenty of people who heard things like that and chose not to believe them. As much as your circumstances determine your reality, so does your mindset. I have mentioned multiple times in this podcast what an abusive home I was raised in. I never felt safe. I did not know what feeling safe felt like until I was in my mid-20s. And it was shocking to me to feel it. I didn't know it was a possibility. I didn't know that that was a way that you could feel. I didn't know that it was possible for me. However, I always believed in magic. In spite of everything that I was going through, in spite of all of the abuse, in spite of all of the horror and emotional neglect and manipulation and gaslighting and everything else that I went through, I never stopped believing in magic. I never stopped believing that somehow something could be better. And I'm not really sure why I held on to that, but I did. I always believed that it could be better. Even when I didn't believe it, there was a part of me that believed it. which is a very weird thing to say, but even in my most negative mindset, there was a voice in the back of my head that said, you know, this isn't reality. Even when I felt the most despair, there was a voice that said, yeah, but. And I always choose to listen to that voice, which is how I've lived as long as I have, because self-harm and suicidal ideations have been a constant companion of mine since I was 7 years old. But there's always that voice that says, keep trying, keep going. It's bad now, but it'll get better. Nothing can stay this dark forever. And that's me. Not everyone is like me, and I'm aware of that. But I'm also aware that you choose which voice you listen to. In many religions and traditions and just folk traditions and social ideas, there is this concept of two voices. Sometimes it's portrayed as an angel on one shoulder and a demon on the other, and sometimes it's talked about as two wolves, and whatever it is, there is this idea that there are conflicting ideologies within you. And whichever one you give attention to, whichever one you give energy to, whichever one you listen to is the one that wins. And I very much believe that. If you choose to believe that your life is terrible, then it is. It doesn't matter how much or how little you have. It is because you believe it to be so, and you make it so. I know people who have been given every help, every opportunity, every assistance that anyone could want, and stay stuck in a mentality that their life is terrible. And it is, because they have chosen for it to be so. I know people who have scraped and pieced and built their life from nothing for it to still be mostly nothing. And they stay positive and they stay happy and will tell you they are blessed, they are lucky, their life is good. And it is. Because they believe it to be so. Because whatever trappings you have around you, your physical life, your house, your belongings, your job, your car or lack thereof, and things such as that are just the dressings. Your life is what you decide it is. And people go through hard times and people go through good times. And that is true no matter where you are in life. I get really mad sometimes when I hear people talking about celebrities, making fun of them, or very wealthy people who, there are articles or whatever that come out about them having mental health problems. And people make fun of them like, how dare they have mental health problems? Who are they to have mental health problems? I wish I could afford to have mental health problems like that. And it always makes me angry when I see comments like that. And I usually refrain from arguing, but sometimes I get dragged into it because mental health doesn't care who you are, whether you're poor or rich or famous or unknown or healthy or unhealthy or in a family or alone or whatever. It doesn't care. People can have depression at any station in life. And to mock it as if it's something that only happens because you're poor is to ignore what depression really is, to deny what it is, or any other mental illness for that matter, not just depression, but it's something that could happen to anyone. And celebrities obviously get press for it because everyone pays attention to what they're doing and they follow them around for every, breakfast or brunch or pants change. And of course it's going to get media because the media pays attention to people who are celebrities. It doesn't mean that a celebrity is seeking attention or being overly dramatic because they're depressed. They have a platform that they can use to raise awareness, and some of them choose to use that platform to raise awareness about things that are important. Not all of them. And a lot of it is self-serving, but that's another topic for another day. The point is that no matter where you're at in life, you can have struggles. They may be different struggles than someone else's depending on what your station is in life, but that doesn't mean it's any less or more of a struggle. And I think that we like to look at other people who are maybe closer to where we want to be with envy rather than motivation. We don't look at it as something to aspire to. We look at it as something to drag down. And so that contributes to a negative mentality, or rather than looking for a way to make things better, to make ourselves better, we just allow ourselves to become envious and essentially tear ourselves down rather than build ourselves up. I think the holidays bring out the worst in people a lot of times. So many people are forced or feel forced to be around people who they normally would not associate with. And dealing with toxic relatives is never fun for anyone. And there are people who have to choose to give up their family for their mental peace. That's something that I've had to do in the last few years. I've spoken repeatedly about my dad and how abusive and toxic he was. And as much as I love his side of the family, my extended family, my aunts and uncles and cousins, they have not chosen to believe me in an active way. And that's their choice, and I can understand that from their perspective. I don't harbor any ill will toward them or feel badly toward them because they weren't the ones who were raped by their dad. They heard about it through me decades after it happened. And I can understand the hesitation. I don't like it. It hurts me, but I can understand it. I can understand the hesitation to believe. I can understand the hesitation to set boundaries with him. But because that has happened, because he's still welcome, I have had to miss family gatherings for my own peace because I cannot be around him. I very delicately rebuilt my mental health after the flashback, remembering what he had done. And it took a while for me to start telling people that it had happened and that I would not be associating with him anymore because of that. And I haven't really told many people one-on-one because I don't feel the need to start a smear campaign against him. But at the same time, I don't want people to think that I am avoiding them or that I don't like them anymore. And so it became necessary for me to explain myself, or at least I felt that it was necessary. And it didn't turn out how I wanted it to in any situation where I relate it to anyone. Every relative that I had who I told gave me some version of, that doesn't surprise me, I always thought he was creepy, or I always suspected there was more going on that I didn't know about because of how you and your sisters acted. And that was kind of the end of it. No one cut him off too. No one wanted to take up for me. No one was protective of me. Everyone was loving. They said they believed me, and everyone said that I was always welcome there. But there was no guarantee that I was welcome and I would always be safe there, that he wouldn't be there too. And if you're a person who has been on the other side of this situation, if you're a relative who has been on the side of this situation, just know it's important to let the victim know that they don't have to worry about seeing their abuser. You might think it's obvious, but it's not. And I think in our society, it's becoming less. But we have a long tradition in our society that you owe your presence to your relatives, especially to your immediate family. There's this tired, worn out trope of, well, it's your dad, well, it's your mom, well, it's your grandmother, it's your whoever. You gotta love them. Well, first of all, no, you don't. You don't have to give your love to anyone who you don't want to. It's your love. You get to decide who gets it. And secondly, you don't have to associate with them. You don't have to associate with people who hurt you just because you have a blood tie to them. You didn't choose to have that blood tie. You're not obligated to them just because you are biologically related. Doing the absolute bare minimum of keeping children alive does not make you a good parent. And We have this idea that children owe parents something because they kept them alive. Children didn't ask to be born. Parents chose to bring them into the world. The act of bringing a child into the world brings with it the absolute bare minimum responsibility of keeping them alive and raising them to be able to be functional adults. If you accomplish that, good. You've carried out your basic biological responsibility. Animals do that too. You are owed nothing. And that's nothing against parents, good or bad. But your children don't owe you anything for you fulfilling the basic responsibility that is required of you if you bring a child into the world. That's just the gig. You made that choice. And people get very hung up on feeling like they owe someone their presence, that they have to go to the family Christmas party or reunion or whatever. And you don't. And that's the thing, is that we live with this societal guilt of expectations that we absolutely don't have to take on. If someone is mean to you, you don't have to go around that person. If the person who's mean to you is your dad or your mom or your great aunt Bethunia, who hosts the family Christmas party every year, you don't have to go to the family Christmas party. It's not a law, moral or legal. You can skip it. And I think we get too tied up in our attachments to biological relatives. We think we owe people things that we don't. I see it even in parents of adult children who refuse to grow up. They won't let go, and they feel responsible. Once your child is an adult, you are released from your responsibility of raising them and keeping them alive. That doesn't mean that they're no longer your child or that you don't love them, but your responsibility as a parent is to help them become an adult. Once they're an adult, you are released from that responsibility. They're there. You did it. Good job. And allowing manipulation from toxic relatives, whether it's a parent or a child or an extended relative, only hurts you and anyone you love. It doesn't help anything. It doesn't teach anyone any good things as far as responsibility or caring or love. It shows everyone that you're a doormat and you are a slave to societal expectations or your own guilt, and you are easily manipulated into being abused emotionally or otherwise. So Christmas was yesterday, but sometimes there are still holiday gatherings. If you're listening to this and you're debating with yourself if you should go be around those toxic people, I am giving you permission to let yourself off the hook. Your health is more important than making toxic people happy, and mental health is health. If being around someone toxic is destroying you, then don't be around them. Don't go around them. There is nothing that counterbalances that to make it okay. And I realize that a lot of times toxic relatives come in groups. And a lot of times, narcissistic, toxic relatives come with flying monkeys who help them guilt you into doing whatever they want you to do. But that doesn't mean you're in the wrong. You don't owe anyone your presence. And whether the reason is that you can't be around that toxic relative, or that you're physically ill, or that you're financially unable, or that your chronic health or chronic pain issues or mental health just won't allow you to go, it's okay to not go. Whether the reason is that you're so terrible I can't be around you, or the reason is just I don't have it in me to do it, you're allowed to protect your mental health. Because the more you push yourself to do what is against your better judgment, what is against your best interest, what is against what is healthy for you, the more you push yourself in the opposite direction, the more you become unpleasant to be around, as people like to say. The more you are predisposed to what we talked about earlier in the episode, these overreactions, the explosiveness, the unreasonable, disproportionate overreactions. And you owe yourself peace. Whatever you need to do to find it, whatever you need to do to call it in, you owe it to yourself. And so whether you need distance for healing, or distance because your brain can't take anymore, or distance because you need to reset your mindset, it's okay to take distance at the holidays. And it doesn't mean that you hate that person. It doesn't mean you're being mean to them. It doesn't mean you're a bad person, or that you're never going to see them again. Maybe you just need some time, not all of the time. But the responsibility for your peace rests squarely on your own shoulders. And if you don't create it for yourself, it won't happen. When I was still going to church, I had a friend, and he made a point about the Beatitudes sermon that Jesus preached. Blessed are the peacemakers. He didn't say peacekeepers. He didn't say peaceful people. He said the peacemakers, which means those who actively create peace. To actively create peace means to drive out anything that is in disharmony with peace. And sometimes that means compromise and coming to an agreement. And sometimes that means kicking out the person who's hurting someone you love. Sometimes peacemaking means fighting so that there can be peace. I hope that if you're listening to this and you are resonating with things that I have said, if you are not a person who has experienced peace, I hope you will soon be blessed as a peacemaker. Because you deserve it. You owe it to yourself. And for that matter, for those of you who have trouble doing anything for yourselves, you owe it to the people around you. I hope you will join me next week. Tune back in next week as we continue to work on our mosaic in progress.